Hey there folks, welcome to the channel. I'm glad you can make it because in today's episode, I'm going to take you step by step through the process on how to make the perfect hot dog. Well, not exclusively the hot dog, because you can apply this video to basically any emulsified sausage. And so if you want to make the Italian mortadella, the Swedish falukorv, or the Vietnamese nham nhung, you should be able to use the techniques that we talk about in this video to make all of those emulsified sausages. And in the interest of full disclosure, I do have to admit that the emulsified sausage is not my favorite sausage to make. It is very technical, it's pretty challenging, it does require special equipment, and if you're a producer like I am who makes charcuterie out of his house, you can't really make a whole lot at one time. But with that being said, it is incredibly hard to beat a properly made artisan emulsified sausage. The texture, the flavor, absolutely amazing. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is the equipment necessary in order to make an emulsified sausage at home. Commercially, they use something called a buffalo chopper or a bowl cutter, and these can be pretty expensive depending on the size and the brand, but at home we can achieve similar results using this right here. A meat grinder. And although this is a number 32 from the sausage maker, the size of the grinder doesn't matter. One thing I would stay away from is the KitchenAid grinder. They're not very efficient and they produce way too much heat. You're also going to need a dedicated sausage stuffer, and it doesn't matter the size. This is the smallest one the sausage maker has. It is a 5-pound sausage stuffer and works perfect. Next up is a food processor, and although you might have a food processor at home, there's a decent chance it might not be strong enough to handle emulsified sausages. You're going to want one with a real heavy-duty commercial-style motor. Robocoup is a great brand. They make an exceptional product, and it definitely takes care of business, but it is a bit pricey. So check the description box below, and I'll try to list out a couple different options for food processors that have a good motor that aren't nearly this expensive. This particular bowl is 7 quarts, so it's almost 2 gallons. And the size of the bowl is completely relative to how much food you can process. Most bowls that are between 3 to 4 quarts or 5 quarts can process about a kilo of meat at a time. In this particular food processor, I can process maybe 2 kilos of meat. So that's 4.4 pounds. Chime in the comment section below if you happen to have burned up a food processor because the motor wasn't strong enough. And also, if you make emulsified sausages successfully, I'd love to hear the type of food processor that you are currently using. Drop it in the comment section below as well. All right, we've got the grinder, stuffer, and the food processor. Those are the 3 big pieces of equipment that you're going to need to make an emulsified sausage, but we can't forget about the instant read thermometer. This is one from ThermoWorks. It really doesn't matter what kind you use, but you are going to want to have one of these because temperature is critical at every one of the steps, and this can make the difference between a poor emulsified sausage and an extraordinary emulsified sausage. All right, the next thing that we need to talk about is the condition of your knives. How sharp are they? Because if they're not razor sharp, forget about it. And I'm talking about the grinder knife and plate, as well as the food processor blades. Let me show you how I take care of mine. The first set of blades that you want to sharpen are for your grinder, both the plate and the knife. And I'll put a video suggestion right there in the top right-hand corner, as well as at the end of this video, to show you the entire process. But basically, we're using a glass lapping plate, along with various grit sandpaper, starting with a coarse one and then ending with a finer one. And the idea here is to do both sides of the plate, as well as the grinder knife. And when you're finished, if done correctly, you're going to have a very sharp set. Here's a test to see if your grinder plate and knife is razor sharp. Just put a single piece of paper inside one of the holes, and then the knife should make a very clean cut, no ripping whatsoever. There you go. That's what it should look like. The next blade that needs to be sharpened, and I realize that this one's a little more complicated, is the blade for your food processor. These blades need to be razor sharp. Matter of fact, I would go so far as to say that if you can't get these blades razor sharp, then I wouldn't even bother making an emulsified sausage, because you're going to end up with a sausage that has an undesirable texture. My food processor allows me to remove the blades, as you can see right here, which makes sharpening a little bit easier. But if you can't remove the blades, you might want to either take it to a professional to get it sharpened, or even get maybe like a small sharpening stone and see if you can do it by hand. The way that I sharpen mine is with a guided sharpening system by Genda Industries called the Jigs. I just sort of attach it right here on the very end, and because it has an extra large arm, it makes sharpening super easy. What I'm doing here is just outlining the bevel so that I can find the right angle. And then with the stone, I'm just making very quick passes and micro adjustments until the entire red line is removed, at which point I would have found my angle, and then I'll proceed with the sharpening. This is the completed blade, and let me just kind of give you a couple quick tests to see if yours is sharp enough. Put the blade end on your fingernail
and it should feel like it sticks to your nail, like it's very grabby. If that's the case, you more than likely have a decent edge and you're good to go. But if it's sliding on your fingernail, that more than likely means that your edge is rolled and your blade needs to be sharpened. Another little test, you could take a piece of paper with your food processor blade and you should be able to cut it without any problems whatsoever. Much like this. There we go. Absolutely perfect. And obviously I just sharpened these blades, so I know that they are razor sharp. And this is how sharp your food processor blade should be. And I can't stress this enough. This is critically important for the success of a great emulsified sausage.
Critically important. I can't stress that enough. Let's talk about protein selection, because you can make an emulsified sausage out of just about whatever protein you like, whether it's alligator, shrimp, fish, beef, duck, veal, goose, lamb, pork. Obviously, it doesn't really matter, but there are certain cuts of meat that actually work better than others. Let's kind of take a look at some of the different cuts, and I'll explain to you the differences.
All right, so what I have here are different cuts that I use often when making sausages that are both beef and pork. This is the eye of round. This is the bottom round. Both of those are lean cuts. This right here is the pork shoulder. A lot of connective tissue in the pork shoulder. And then right here, we've got pork back fat. Some of it has the skin still on, some of it does not. This cut of pork here in the back comes from the hind leg of the pig. That is also known as the ham, and it is also a very lean cut. So when it comes to your meat selection, first and foremost, you want to get the freshest cuts you can get your hands on, and you want to try to work with your leaner cuts, cuts that don't have so much connective tissue. These cuts tend to have more myosin and actin, and those are the proteins that are responsible for really binding the meat, the fat, the water, all of that stuff together. So here in front of me, this is a great cut. That's the bottom round. Nice, beautiful, lean cut. Also the pork ham, another great cut for making an emulsified sausage. Basically, any lean cut from just about any animal will work. If you are going to be using a cut that has a lot of connective tissue, sinew, things like that, you are going to want to do a little knife work, trim all that stuff off before you begin the process of grinding and then later chopping. So in today's example, we're going to be making the Houston Kolache sausage, incredible sausage, and we have a little bit of lean beef, some pork back fat, and some lean pork. And these three are going to come together to make an absolutely exquisite emulsified sausage. Notice there's no connective tissue. We don't have any skin, any sinew, none of that stuff. And that's what I would recommend. And that's going to give you the absolute best chance for success. Before we move on to the next step, what I am going to do is cut this down into pieces that are a little bit more manageable and will fit into the grinder no problem. We're going to do the beef, the pork, and the fat. And here on the ham portion of the pork, we're just removing anything that's undesirable. I just want 100% meat. Everything else is going to go into that little pile. And that's just going to keep everything nice and clean without any problems. Once we're finished, we're going to take all the meat and the fat. Now remember, the fat is going to be kind of to the side. We want to keep it separate. We're going to pop that into the freezer so that it can properly be chilled before we grind it.
Some of you may have questions at this point, and that's okay. If you do, leave them in the comment section below. And let me clarify one particular thing about proteins. When it comes to making an emulsified sausage, you can literally use whatever cut you want. Obviously, they do it commercially. But my point in this segment is that you're going to have a better chance of success if you stick with leaner cuts of meat. But once you get better at making emulsified sausages and you start to better understand the relationship between fat, water, protein, salt, binders, temperatures, things like that, you can start to experiment with tongue, with different organ meats with lots of connective tissues, things like that, to kind of create your very own unique, beautiful emulsified sausage. So if you want the best chance of success when making an emulsified sausage, I would say stick with lean meat and fat. And it doesn't matter what animal you're using, whether it's chicken, beef, pork, it really doesn't matter. All right, let's talk about how to process that meat. We want our meat to be broken down into very, very fine particles. And we can either let the food processor do all the work, which is kind of problematic for the food processor, or we can start off by using our grinder and allow that grinder to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to show you the technique that I use when it comes to grinding the meat first before we put it into the food processor. Let me show you.
Since we're here, I can't state this enough. Make sure your knife and your grinder plate is razor sharp. One way to check is to run your fingers across the holes on your plate, and you'll actually feel the edge. It'll feel kind of grabby. It's a strange sensation, but once you do it once or twice, you'll know what you're looking for. The edge will feel very defined. All right, so what we're going to do is start grinding our meat on the 10mm plate. This is a great place to start as it generates the least amount of heat between all three of the plates. Once we're done with the 10mm plate, we're going to scale it down to the 6mm plate, grind our meat there, and then we're going to finish it up on the 4.5mm plate. If you happen to have a 3mm plate, that is great as well. The idea here is to chop up our meat into the smallest particle size possible before we put it into the food processor. The meat's ready to come out of the freezer, and it is definitely partially frozen. We're looking for a temperature between 30 and 34 Fahrenheit. That's kind of where I like to hover. This is going to ensure that you get a really nice grind. So let's get this into the grinder. And the grinder that we're going to be using is a number 32 Pro Series from the sausage maker. And when I grind, I rarely use the plunger. Matter of fact, this plunger is going to sit on the table, and we're not going to pick it up one time. You're going to see how we grind the meat and the fat. It's going to be super clean, absolutely amazing. So number one, remember, our meat is partially frozen and cut up into manageable pieces, and we are just going to gently, patiently put our meat into the throat of the auger. And I'm not going to add more meat until what's in there gets caught by the auger. So I don't want to overwhelm the auger. I'm just going to very slowly push it in there. As you can see right here, everything's working out beautifully. Let's take a look at our grind. Perfect. Coming out nice and even, beautiful flow, very pebbly. This is exactly what we're looking for. Let's grab a handful, stick it back into the grinder. That's going to get any of the remaining meat particles that weren't quite ground up. That's going to push that through, and we are done with our first grind. Let's take the temperature of our meat, because at each one of these stages, if the temperature has risen above 34 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to want to re-chill it. But as you can see here, we are at 32 and dropping, absolutely perfect. We do not need to re-chill. We can go ahead and change out the plate and do our second grind. And we're going to treat this grind exactly like the first one. No plunger whatsoever. Just very carefully, very slowly, add that meat into the throat. Let the auger grab it and shoot it out the other side. And because it's already coarsely ground, this is grinding really fast, really beautiful. Look at that. We have spaghetti-like strains coming out of our grinder. None of them look like they are smearing, which is exactly what we're looking for at this stage. Once again, we'll grab a handful, stick it back into the grinder to push any of that meat out. And we are done with grind number 2. Let's do a quick temperature check. Remember, anything under 34 degrees is good. If it's above 34 degrees, we should re-chill, and it looks like we are good to go. We are 30 and dropping. So, excellent. One more time here for the meat. We're going to be grinding on a 4.5mm plate. And just like the other 2 times, we're going to slowly feed that into the throat of the grinder. Let the auger catch it. Notice we haven't used the plunger one time. No mess. And the reason we can do that is because our meat was properly chilled before we began the grinding process. As we check the grind itself, we have beautiful spaghetti-like strands. Nothing looks like it's smearing. You definitely want to check underneath it along the side, because if it is smearing, that generally means that your grinder plate is clogged up. You should clean it before you continue grinding. I'm loving what I'm looking at right here. This is absolutely perfect. Everything is independent. It's not mushy. Super good. Let's look at the grinder plate real quick. And I'm going to tell you that if you're going to have problems, it's generally going to be on the smaller plate, either the 4.5mm or the 3mm plate. But check this out. Very clean plate. Every one of the holes are wide open, which is why we were getting such a great grind. And that's in part because we were using meat without a lot of connective tissue, sinew, things like that, but also because our plate and knife are super sharp, and that helps out in the process as well. And so this is what you want yours to look like by the time you're done, and we are now officially done with the meat. Triple grind. Let's move on to the fat. The fat's a little trickier. We're going to start with that 10mm grind, and between each grind, I am actually going to re-chill it regardless of what the temperature is. So I'm going to get it down to, 29, 30 degrees Fahrenheit. That's going to really preserve the integrity of the fat. Grind number 1 has finished. We have re-chilled it, and now we are sticking it back into the grinder. This is the second grind as it's going in for the 6mm plate. This is what that grind looks like. Absolutely beautiful. Once again, re-chilled, and this is the final grind, 4.5mm. Notice the plunger right there in the back. Never needed it, as the grinder never got bogged down once. And we are officially done. Our fat has been ground up 3 times. Our fat strains look beautiful. They are not smeared, so when I'm grabbing these pieces right here, my hands are not greasy, which is what we're looking for. Let's now re-chill this as we take a look at the next step in this process.
Let's talk about spices. Most of the emulsified sausage recipes on the twoguysandacooler.com website are pretty dialed in to specific flavor profiles, but there is still a lot of room for creativity. In my opinion, the only real necessary ingredient when it comes to spices for your emulsified sausage is salt. Everything else is to taste. Salt actually not only flavors the sausage, but it extracts salt-soluble proteins from the meat. We're talking about proteins called myosin and actin. And these proteins is what's going to help form an unbreakable bond between the protein, the fat, and the water. And so when it comes to salt in your recipe, I would stick to anything between 1.5% and 2%, depending on, what your salt tolerance is. And that should be enough to really extract those beautiful salt-soluble proteins and yield an amazing product.
When it comes to adding flavor or spice to your sausage, it's best to approach that particular topic with a sense of simplicity. Simple is better. I can tell you from experience that it is very easy to overwhelm a sausage with too many spices. And so what I would suggest here is think about the protein that you're going to be using and how do you want to accent it. What's your primary flavor, your dominant flavor? What's your secondary flavor? Are you going to be adding herbs, garlic, things of that nature? This is a topic that really deserves its own space. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on spices in this video, but if you want to see a full dedicated video on how to create your own recipe, how to know which spice to add and how much of it to add, let me know in the comment section below, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. But the bottom line is this: if you're going to be writing your own recipe, be conservative with how you add your spices. You can always add more, after you give it a little taste. It's very difficult to take away.
In addition to spices, we got to talk about binders, and there are lots of different binders to choose from. We'll take a look at a few here in a second, but binders play an incredibly important role when it comes to making an emulsified sausage, because you got to remember, we're taking meat, we're taking fat, and we're taking a lot more liquid than normal, and we're trying to combine those into one unbreakable bond. And we're going to need a little help. So let me show you some of the most popular binders that people use in emulsified sausages and how to use each one.
Okay, we've got 5 binders here in front of us, and there are lots of different options when it comes to binders, but let's go through the ones we have here and talk about them. This one is a phosphate called sodium hexametaphosphate, and it is one of 11 phosphates that are approved for use in meat. Phosphates increase the water holding and water binding capabilities in meat, which makes it a great additive to use in things like emulsified sausages. Now, I will say that this particular topic also deserves its own video. If you want a dedicated video on phosphates, how to use them, what do they do, things like that, should you be concerned, let me know also in the comment section below. But you are going to be using this at a rate of 0.3% per the weight of the meat, or 3 grams per kilo. The next binder is one called non-fat dry milk, and this particular product is not the same as the one you would typically find in your grocery store. This version of non-fat dry milk has been heated to a higher temperature, and it's specifically designed to be used in baking and the production of sausages. If you're going to be looking for this, look for high heat non-fat dry milk powder, and you're going to use this at a rate of 2% to 4% inside your sausage recipe. This product will actually impart a very slight sweetness and a very light creaminess to the finished sausage product. The next binder is one called potato starch. I use this particular product a lot, primarily because of its availability, but it also does a great job, and you would also use this at a rate of 2 to 4% by the weight of the meat. Next up is soy protein concentrate, another binder that not only improves the texture, but the flavor of your sausage. You're going to use this at a rate of 2 to 4% inside your recipe, and it also improves the water holding and binding capability. This final binder is one called C-Bind. This is made out of carrot fiber, and it's actually pretty interesting. The packet isn't very big, but you don't need a lot, somewhere between 0.4% to 1% of the weight of the meat. What's interesting about this particular binder is that it actually absorbs 25 to 27 times its own weight in water and up to 4 times its own weight in rendered fat. So this particular binder will not only increase the water holding capability, the binding properties, but can also help you out in the event that you smeared some of the fat during processing by absorbing that fat. And as far as I know, I don't think there's another product on the market that does that. Now, I'm not saying that C-Bind is the only way to go, because I've used each one of these binders in front of me and they all work. But if you're just getting started and you want a little extra help, I do believe that C-Bind can fill in the blanks as you are perfecting your technique. So anyway, there you go. That's my 2 cents. Okay, that's our discussion on binders. Let's talk about ice. Ice is a big part of an emulsified sausage recipe. Not only does it help keep the temperature of our meat and fat low, but as it melts through the process, the ice softens up our farce and really helps us to achieve that beautiful texture that we're looking for. The problem is that we don't want to use the ice in this format. It's way too big and will wreak havoc on our food processor blades. So we need to crush this ice into something considerably smaller. If you happen to have an ice machine that does it, I would just go ahead and use that. If you have a nugget ice maker, that works beautiful as well. This is is what my end product looks like. We've got that ice crushed up. There's still a couple large pieces in there. I'm not going to be using those large pieces, but for the most part, this is what you want your ice to look like when you add it to your food processor during the stages of emulsification. Unlike a regular sausage, an emulsified sausage can have up to 20 or 25% ice in it.
All right, guys, we're almost there. We've ground the meat into fairly fine particles as well as the fat. We've talked about spices, salt being the most important. The rest are basically to taste. We've talked about binders and ice. And now it's time to take all those ingredients and throw them into our food processor where we complete the chopping process. When it comes to chopping, we're going to break this down into two segments. The first segment is going to be protein extraction, and the second segment is going to be emulsification. Both are extremely critical. Let me show you how it's done.
Our meat mix has been chilled, and we're going to take the temperature of it real quick because we want the meat and the fat to be below 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Notice the meat is at 30 and dropping. Very good. And as far as the fat goes, we are at, let's see here, 28, 27. Absolutely perfect. The meat and the fat have been kept separate, and the reason we do that is because during the initial chopping stage, the protein extraction stage, we're extracting proteins from the meat, not the fat. And so we don't want to run the risk of smearing the fat by over chopping it. So we're only going to start with the meat, and then we're going to add the fat towards the end. We have our crushed ice, and then we have our binder and our spices. The binders are generally added at the end of the process. In this case, we're using C-bind, but if you use non-fat dry milk, potato starch, or soy protein concentrate, you're going to add that at the end as well. The only exception is that if you use phosphates, you can actually add that at the very beginning with your spices. All right, so if you use phosphates, you can add that at any time during the process, but if you use any of the other binders, you want to add that at the very end of the process. There we go. All right, so now that we have that all lined up, let's add it to the food processor. We've got our blade in place, and like I said earlier, you can't really do a whole lot because you want everything to chop up evenly. We're going to be putting 1 kilo in here, but I can do about 2 in a 7-quart bin. Notice the fat's going to stay to the side. The fat doesn't need to be chilled at this stage. Matter of fact, it works better if it's not frozen, so we're just going to leave it on the counter. We're going to add our spices, and here's the C-bind right here. We're going to add that at the end of the process, so that's going to stay to the side. I do want to take the temperature as we begin, and we want the temperature under 34 degrees because during this initial chopping stage, you don't want the temperature of the meat to exceed 45 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? You don't want it to go above 45. Anything below that is going to be great. So we're going to start by adding 1/3 of the ice that we have. That's going to keep the temperature really low. It's going to give us the opportunity to chop this into even finer particles. And because the grinder did most of the work already, we're not going to have to chop that long. I want you to notice this one thing right here. There's going to be a moment as we chop where the meat kind of balls up and starts whipping around the bin. I'm going to pulse this a couple times, and then we'll turn the unit on. And I want you to see that ball starting to form right there, kind of making its way. This little section right here, when your food processor does that, this is the food processor killer. If you don't have a strong enough motor, it won't be able to get through that one particular step, and it'll burn it up. Notice how the ball is no longer whipping around the bowl. That means we are past that stage, and we need to check the temperature. My advice when it comes to chopping is chop in relatively short increments. I would say chop for 15 or 20 seconds and then check the temperature. If you notice that the temperature is getting too hot, because this food processor does generate a lot of heat, you can always add another 1/3 of your ice, and that'll help bring the temperature down. It'll also help soften that batter up a little bit. So now we're good. We're still really low on the temperature. And what we're looking for in this first stage is total protein extraction. The salt is pulling the myosin and the actin from the meat, and it should be getting really sticky. It should be pretty dense, and we want to just kind of separate it a little bit from the wall with a spatula. And you got to be careful. If your blades are razor sharp, which they should be, you could easily cut yourself in this stage. So let's continue to chop, and we are just about done. Remember, during this first chopping stage, we don't want to exceed 45 degrees Fahrenheit or 7 Celsius. That's our target, because under 45 degrees Fahrenheit is when we can extract protein most effectively. And what you're looking at is basically real time. We chopped this last batch for about 10 seconds. We're going to take the temperature very quickly, and under 45 is what I'm looking for, and it looks like we are at 39, 38. Very good. And when I look at the meat, and here's what you're looking for at this stage, because you don't necessarily need to chop until you get to 45. What you're looking for is you're looking for a very sticky, relatively dense batter. The meat looks more like a paste at this point, and I am very happy with where we're at. This final stage of chopping is the emulsification stage. At this point, we're going to add our ice, And then we're going to come back with our fat and our binder. This is the stage where everything comes together. All the proteins that we've extracted, the binder that we've added, the water and the fat, this is where we get to combine it. Kind of like you're making mayonnaise, if you think about it like that. And so we need to make sure that we bring the temperature up a little bit, but we don't want to exceed 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 13 Celsius. And so when I do this particular stage, I typically chop until we get to about 50 to 53 Fahrenheit. Everything should be smooth and homogeneous. There should be no discernible differences between the meat and the fat. We've been chopping now for about, I'd say total maybe 60 seconds. I did edit this a little bit to save a little time. And this is what our farce looks like. Incredibly smooth. Not nearly as dense as it was when we were only chopping the meat, but notice you don't see any particles of meat and fat. It's just one batter. Also, it is very sticky, and this is exactly what we're aiming to achieve. Let's take the temperature. Remember, under 55 Fahrenheit is what we're shooting for, and it looks like our temp is 53. We are done. Our farce is ready, and it's now time to get it into a casing. Now, one thing I will say, commercially, there are vacuum chambers that are used to kind of eliminate the air pockets that are typically formed in emulsified sausages. And so if you want, and you happen to have a chamber vac, you could just put your batter in the chamber vac, vacuum it for 30 or 45 seconds, do that a couple times, and it removes a lot of the air pockets that are formed when you make an emulsified sausage. And that's totally optional. It doesn't affect the flavor or anything like that. Now let's talk about casings when you're dealing with small diameter sausage. I'm personally in the natural casing camp. I'm not opposed to synthetic casings like collagen casings. I just find that natural casings are exponentially easier to work with and produce a better product, but that's just a personal opinion. In this case, I'm using 24 millimeter sheep casings. And in the world of sheep casings, you can get everything from 16 millimeter on up to, I think, 28 millimeter, something like that. So there's a lot of different options when it comes to natural casings for small diameter sausages. When it comes to stuffing the sheep casing, you definitely want to take your time. You don't want to have too much pressure on the tip of the horn, and you just want to let that farce push the casing off the horn, just like I'm doing here. If you get high quality casings, A or AA grade, that are specifically meant for emulsified sausages, then you should have little to no blowouts, as long as you take your time and do it correctly. All right, so we got the first one done. Let's do the second one, and then we're going to link everything up. When it comes to linking your sausage, you can link it to whatever size you want. You can keep it as a coil. It really just depends on the style of sausage you're making and your own personal preference. If you happen to see any air pockets, just give them a little prick. Not that big a deal. With an emulsified sausage, you don't overly have to prick it like we do some of the other sausages, but I do like to get rid of some of the air pockets in the event that they show up. It just makes a cleaner, more uniform product.
All right, guys, our emulsified sausages look absolutely incredible. No problem with the stuffing. They look great in that sheep casing. And we just happen to be making the Houston kolache sausage. You could be making the mortadella or the bologna. It doesn't really matter. The only difference really is the size of the casing and the different spices that you choose to use. But the process is exactly the same. And now, as we finish up the process, because we're not done yet, how do you cook it? You could do everything right in this entire video, but if you do not cook the emulsified sausage properly, it can be a total disaster. I, for one, like a little smoke flavor on my sausage, whether it's an emulsified sausage or not. And so I'm going to show you the technique that I use when it comes to smoking an emulsified sausage from start to finish. That way you can kind of get a good idea. I wouldn't recommend starting and finishing in your smoker unless you do have the ability to really amp up the amount of humidity inside your smoker, because you can end up with a relatively rubbery texture if you don't do it correctly, and you'll know the minute that the sausages come out.
So I'm going to place these dogs into the smoker with no heat, and I did add a tray of water with a paper towel in it, wicked over the side, to increase the humidity inside the smoker. That's going to keep the sausage from turning rubbery. Now, we are going to be cold smoking this for about an hour and a half, and cold smoking is smoking under 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything above that is not cold smoking. That's technically cooking. We are not going to be cooking at this stage. We're just going to be adding that beautiful smoke flavor, and I do not want to apply any heat at this because we're going to actually cook these when we're done smoking. This first step is all about flavor, and it's totally optional. I do want to have a nice gentle stream of smoke coming from the smoker, much like so, because we want to pack as much smoke flavor as we can in a very small amount of time. So an hour and a half has passed. Let's take a look at our sausages. I can definitely tell they've taken on some beautiful color. That smoke flavor is going to be present, and they look amazing. So we're going to finish this process in a water bath. Let me show you how to do it. To finish up the process, we have transferred the hot dogs into a vacuum seal bag. We're going to cook these sous vide 145 degrees Fahrenheit for about an hour. In my opinion, this is a great way to cook your hot dogs because you can precisely control the temperature. You can also poach these in a pot of water at 175 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 25 minutes, but you run the risk of fatting out your sausage if the water gets too hot. So I like this method because it is very predictable and the results are going to be absolutely incredible. So into the preheated water bath they go. It's been an hour and it's time for our sausage to come out and get cooled down. What I really like about this method is that you're basically pre-cooking your sausage. At this point, our sausages are 100% cooked. You can serve them, you can cool them down and freeze them. The choice is yours. Personally speaking, when it comes to reheating these babies, I like to fire up the pit because it gives it that absolutely amazing flavor. All right, let's cool these down. We're going to set it in the water until the temperature gets below, 100 degrees. You just want to stop the cooking process at this point. And now we're done. All the hard work is behind us. Anything you could have potentially messed up is a part of your past, and we now get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. I will say that if the bag or the poaching liquid has a bunch of rendered fat in it, that generally means that you smear the fat somewhere along the way, either through the grinding or the chopping phase. Maybe the temperatures got too hot. Either way, when that happens and you have a lot of oil inside your water, your sausage is almost always going to be grainy. And that's a direct result of the fat leaking out. We call that fatting out. This is what the center slice looks like of our Houston kolache hot dog. Absolutely beautiful. Very smooth slice. Absolutely perfect. Let's give it a little squeeze. We've got that beautiful, bouncy, springy texture. That's what we're looking for in a very well-made emulsified sausage. Let's give it a cook and eat it.
All right, guys, it's time to taste our emulsified sausage. One last little peek. It's just glistening with how juicy it is. I'm loving that. Texture feels amazing. Smells absolutely incredible. Just so you know that this particular recipe, the Houston kolache sausage, will be featured on Celebrate Sausage Season 5. Can you believe we're already on Season 5, where we have an entire month dedicated to absolutely incredible sausage recipes. You get a new sausage recipe every single day through the month of October. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. Let's go ahead and give it a bite and see how we did. Wow, that is so good. Great flavor, super juicy. That sheep casing is ultra tender. It's got the right texture. I mean, this is definitely next level emulsified sausage, not like the kind of stuff you get in the store. And that's the cool thing about making these at home. Now, don't get me wrong, this still is my least favorite sausage to make, but the cool thing about making them is that you get to customize it depending on the protein that you use, or the combination of proteins that you use, or the type of muscles that you use will ultimately affect the end product. How much binder you use, the type of liquid, the spices, all of that really great stuff. And at the end of the day, how you add all of those ingredients together, you could really come up with something absolutely unique and incredibly delicious. One more bite. Well, woo, that is good. I'll tell you what. All right, guys, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed today's hot dog making masterclass. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. And like I said at the beginning of this video, you can apply just about whatever emulsified sausage recipe that there is out there to the techniques in this video, and it should turn out pretty amazing. If you like this video or got something out of it in any way, give it a thumbs up. And if you are not subscribed to this channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell, because in less than 8 weeks, we have got Celebrate Sausage Season 5. I cannot believe it's already right around the corner, and you're never going to believe what just happened. We had 4 content creators that were supposed to be a part of the show drop out at the last second, so we're scrambling, trying to fill those positions with new sausages. If there's some ideas that you guys have with sausages that you'd like to see last minute, I don't know if we could even pull it together. Let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to read about it. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.